My name is Vanessa. I am 33 years old, and I spent my birthday dinner listening to my own mother plot to break into my home. We were sitting in a Michelin star restaurant in Manhattan when she leaned across the table and whispered to my father, "Since everyone is here, have your son change the locks at her apartment." I watched my brother quietly excuse himself and slip out the front door. He thought he was heading to an empty, defenseless apartment to steal the one thing I valued most. What he did not know was that he was walking straight into a trap that would cost our family $5 million and their freedom. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart the toxic people who were supposed to love you. The clinking of crystal glasses and the soft melody of a live jazz band masked the tension at our table. I sliced into my medium-rare steak, my expression completely blank, even though my heart was pounding a steady, calculated rhythm. My brother Colin had just walked out to commit a felony on my mother Brenda's orders. He told the table he needed to use the restroom, but I saw him signal the valet through the front window. Brenda took a sip of her expensive Pinot Noir and turned her critical gaze on me. She never missed an opportunity for public humiliation, especially on a day that was supposed to be celebrating me. "So Vanessa," Brenda said, her voice carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant, "are you still working that boring calculator job? I just do not understand how a daughter of mine ended up crunching numbers in a cubicle while Colin is about to launch a tech startup that will change the world." I chewed my food slowly, savoring the rich flavor. "I am a forensic accountant, Mom. I investigate corporate fraud. It pays the bills." Barely, my father William scoffed without looking up from his smartphone. William was an investment broker who measured a person's worth entirely by their net value. "You should ask Colin for a job in his accounting department once his $20 million funding round clears. Maybe then you could afford a dress that does not look off the rack." I glanced across the table at Jada. Jada was Colin's wife, a brilliant corporate lawyer who had married into this nightmare of a family 3 years ago. She was a stunning, fierce African-American woman who wore her natural hair in an elegant updo tonight, and she was the only person at this table with an ounce of integrity. Jada set her fork down with a sharp clink against her porcelain plate. "Vanessa's firm is one of the most respected on Wall Street, William, and her dress is beautiful. Not everything needs a designer label slapped across the chest to have value." Brenda let out a short, condescending laugh, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, Jada, you are always so quick to defend mediocrity. But I suppose when you marry into a family like ours, you have to learn to understand your place. Colin is the visionary. The rest of us simply support his genius." I saw Jada's jaw tighten, her dark eyes flashing with suppressed anger. She was a high-powered attorney, yet my mother constantly treated her like a lucky charity case who should be kissing the ground. Colin walked on. I knew exactly why Jada stayed silent this time. She loved Colin, or at least the version of Colin he presented to her. She had no idea that her visionary husband was drowning in hidden debt, or that his upcoming startup was nothing but a hollow shell company built on lies. The dinner dragged on. For an hour, I endured Brenda's endless boasting about William's real estate empire and Colin's impending billionaire status. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu: fresh oysters, Wagyu beef, and imported truffles, casually putting it all on William's platinum card. They were celebrating a victory they thought was already in their hands. They thought I was just the quiet, obedient scapegoat who would sit there and take their abuse. They had always treated me this way. When I was 19, William forced me to hand over the passwords to my college savings account. He needed the cash to cover the damages when Colin crashed a brand new sports car while driving recklessly under the influence. I worked double shifts at a diner to pay off an $80,000 student loan while Colin coasted through a private university on my stolen funds. I survived their financial abuse by learning exactly how money moved, how it was hidden, and how to track it. I became a forensic accountant to ensure no one could ever steal from me again. And now they were trying to do it one last time. They thought my apartment held the ledgers that could expose their entire operation. They thought I was completely defenseless, unaware of the financial crimes they were committing behind closed doors. They assumed I would just sit at this dinner accepting their insults while Colin broke into my home to destroy the evidence. I took another sip of my wine watching the restaurant doors. The jazz band transitioned to a faster, more upbeat tempo. Brenda was busy telling Jada about a country club membership she was planning to buy for Colin. William was aggressively typing an email on his phone, signaling the sommelier for another bottle of their finest vintage. Just as the waiter brought out a tray of decadent chocolate desserts, the heavy brass doors of the restaurant swung open violently. Colin practically stumbled inside. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His custom-tailored suit was entirely soaked in sweat clinging to his shaking frame. His tie was loosened and his chest heaved as he gasped for air. He bypassed the hostess stand and practically ran to our table, nearly knocking over a waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes. "Colin, darling, what is wrong?" Brenda asked, her mask of high society elegance slipping for a fraction of a second as she saw his disheveled state. "Did you lose your stomach again?" Colin ignored her question. He leaned heavily against the table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the wood. His eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated panic darting around the room, as if he expected someone to tackle him to the floor at any moment. He grabbed Brenda's shoulder, his fingers digging into her expensive silk blouse. "Mom," Colin whispered, his voice trembling so violently I could barely hear him over the music. "Someone is there." "Someone is there," Brenda repeated. Her voice rose an octave, drawing curious glances from the neighboring tables in the dining room. She pulled away from Colin's desperate grip, smoothing the wrinkles from her expensive silk blouse. She was clearly irritated by his disheveled state, but she immediately directed her anger entirely at me. She slammed her wineglass down so hard the deep red liquid splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Vanessa, what is the meaning of this?" Brenda demanded, her eyes narrowing as she pointed an accusing finger in my direction. "Are you hiding some deadbeat boyfriend in that apartment? The apartment your father and I so graciously co-signed for you when you were crying about your rent. I swear you bring nothing but embarrassment to this family. You cannot even maintain a decent home without dragging us into your drama." I looked at her, then at Colin, who was currently gasping for air like a fish thrown onto dry land. He knew. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and the sheer terror radiating from him was palpable. I picked up my linen napkin, calmly wiped the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly next to my half-eaten steak. "You mean the cramped walk-up in Brooklyn?" I asked, keeping my tone completely level. "I sold that back to the bank 3 months ago. The address Colin just tried to break into using the spare key you secretly copied from my purse. Last Thanksgiving is a $5 million penthouse in Tribeca. It is owned entirely by a private limited liability company under my name." William let out a harsh, dismissive sound from the other end of the table. "A $5 million penthouse. You. Do not be ridiculous, Vanessa. You do not have that kind of capital. You are just a glorified bookkeeper. Who is in that apartment right now?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, holding William's gaze with absolute unwavering certainty. "The people inside are not my boyfriends, Dad. They are an elite armed private security firm. I hired them to guard a localized offline server rack located in my home office. And do you want to know what is on those servers?" I shifted my eyes to my brother, who had just collapsed into an empty chair beside his wife, burying his face in his trembling hands. They are holding the unencrypted, unedited ledgers of Colin's fraudulent tech startup. The jazz music in this background suddenly felt incredibly loud, the color completely drained from William's face. The arrogant investment broker facade melted away in an instant, replaced by the cornered, panicked look of a man who realized he had miscalculated a massive risk. His hands gripped the edge of the table. "You little traitor," William hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. He pointed a thick finger at my face. "I will call the police right now. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage and theft. You cannot lock away his intellectual property. You belong behind bars." I did not back down. "Call the cops," I challenged him, my voice turning to ice. "Please, William, pick up your phone right now and dial 911. Tell them your golden boy son just tried to commit a felony break-in to destroy financial evidence. Let us see how that plays out. Will you pay off these cops just like you paid off the precinct commander when Colin crashed his brand new Porsche at 19? Brenda gasped, looking around nervously to see if anyone had heard, but I refused to stop. The years of carrying their burdens and suffering their insults were officially over. Do you remember that night? I asked, the memories fueling the fire in my chest. He was driving recklessly, severely intoxicated, and nearly drove that car into a brick wall. You handed over a suitcase of cash to keep his record spotless so he could go to his Ivy League frat parties without a hitch. Meanwhile, I was working night shifts auditing local businesses just to pay the minimum monthly interest on the $80,000 student loan you explicitly refused to help me with. You told me I had to learn the value of a hard-earned dollar. Well, I learned it. I learned how to track every single one of them, no matter how deeply they are buried in offshore accounts. William's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. We did what we had to do to protect this family's future. Colin is destined for greatness. You were always just trying to drag him down out of petty jealousy. Jealousy. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that cut through the tension. I am not jealous of a man who is currently facing 20 years in federal prison for fabricating user data and forging revenue streams to secure venture capital. Until this precise moment, Jada had remained completely silent. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her eyes darting between Colin, my parents, and me. Jada was a Harvard-educated corporate lawyer. She dealt with high-stakes corporate litigation daily. She knew the law, she knew the severe penalties for financial fraud, and most importantly, she knew when someone was lying. The heavy silver fork slipped from Jada's fingers, clattering loudly against her china plate. The sound cut through the heavy tension at our table like a gunshot. She slowly turned her head to look at her husband. Her dark eyes were devoid of the warmth and love they usually held for him. They were replaced by a lethal analytical precision. It was the exact kind of look she gave hostile witnesses on the stand right before she destroyed their testimony. "Colin." Jada said, her voice dangerously calm. "You told me you were going to the restroom because the seafood was upsetting your stomach. But you just left this restaurant to try and break into an apartment." Colin could not look at her. He kept his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Jada, please. It is a massive misunderstanding. She is setting me up. Vanessa is crazy. You know how jealous she gets." Jada did not buy it for a single second. She leaned closer to him, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that sent chills down my own spine. "You just tried to commit a felony break-in while I am sitting here carrying your last name. A felony that could get me disbarred and ruin my entire career if I am implicated as an accessory to your crimes." She turned her sharp gaze back to me, completely ignoring Brenda's frantic attempts to shush her and calm the situation down. "Vanessa, look at me." I met my sister-in-law's eyes, seeing the brilliant, terrifying realization dawning on her face. "What ledgers are you talking about?" Jada demanded, every word perfectly enunciated. "What exactly is my husband hiding on those servers?" The dinner ended in absolute chaos after Jada demanded answers, but my family was never one to back down gracefully. They operated on intimidation and entitlement. By 8 o'clock the next morning, they decided it was time to put me back in my place. They believed they could crush me through sheer force of will, completely unaware that they were marching straight into a slaughterhouse. William, Brenda, and Colin marched into the soaring glass skyscraper on Wall Street, where my firm was headquartered. They brought along their aggressive, high-priced family attorney, a man who charged $1,000 an hour just to breathe menacingly in a boardroom. They stormed past the security desk with the sheer arrogance of people who believed they owned the city. Their plan was incredibly simple. They intended to corner my boss, threaten massive legal action over the servers locked in my penthouse, demand my immediate termination, and force me to hand over Colin's financial ledgers. They fully expected to find a terrified bookkeeper crying in a cramped cubicle begging for her job. A receptionist guided them to the top floor, leading them down a quiet, expansive corridor lined with modern art and frosted glass walls. William was practically vibrating with rage, adjusting his expensive tie, ready to unleash hell on whoever managed my department. Brenda wore a triumphant smirk, clearly anticipating the moment I would be stripped of my livelihood and forced to crawl back to them for forgiveness. William pushed open the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom without even knocking. He opened his mouth to shout his demands, but the words died in his throat. The room was completely silent. I was not cowering in a corner. I was sitting comfortably at the head of a massive mahogany table. Flanking me on both sides were 6 senior executives, the directors of mergers and acquisitions, and 2 of our own top-tier corporate litigators. I wore a tailored navy suit, my hands neatly folded in front of me, radiating an absolute chilling calm. William stared at the scene, utterly disoriented. He looked at the executives in their bespoke suits, then at me, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "I demand to speak to the managing partner of this firm immediately," William barked, trying to project his usual authority, but sounding uncharacteristically frantic. "This employee has committed corporate espionage against my son, and we are here to press charges. Have her clear out her desk right now." I did not flinch. I let his empty threat hang in the cold air-conditioned room for a long moment. The executives beside me simply watched him with expressions of mild amusement and deep pity. "Take a seat, William," I said, my voice projecting authority and complete control. "The managing partner is sitting to your left, but he does not make the final call on this particular portfolio. I do." Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh, stepping forward to stand beside her husband. "You, stop playing dress-up, Vanessa. You are a low-level auditor. Tell your bosses to hand over the servers you stole, or our lawyer will have this entire building shut down by noon." The family attorney puffed out his chest, stepping forward to slap a thick cease and desist order on the table. But before he could speak, I shifted my gaze directly to my brother. Colin was not looking at me. He was staring past my shoulder at the large corporate logo etched into the frosted glass wall behind me. The color had completely vanished from his face. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the back of a heavy leather chair just to stay standing. He looked like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. "You see, my family knew I worked in finance, but they never bothered to ask what I actually did or who I worked for. Because to them, my life was entirely insignificant. They never cared enough to learn the name of my employer." "Welcome to Vanguard Equity," Colin, I said, watching the sheer terror wash over his features. Vanguard Equity was the exact venture capital firm Colin had been relentlessly pursuing for the past 8 months. He had been begging, pleading, and submitting countless fraudulent pitch decks to our firm, desperately trying to secure a $20 million bailout to save his sinking startup before his hidden creditors broke his legs. I stood up slowly, picking up a thick red stamped folder from the table. "Allow me to properly introduce myself to the family," I said, my voice echoing in the silent boardroom. "I am the lead forensic auditor for Vanguard Equity's technology sector. Every single financial document, every user metric, and every revenue projection your son submitted to this firm crossed my desk for verification. And because I take my job very seriously, I cross-referenced his submissions with the actual unencrypted ledgers stored securely on my personal servers." Brenda looked back and forth between Colin and me, her arrogant smirk finally slipping away into profound confusion. "What is she talking about, Colin? Tell her to stop lying and give us the servers." Colin could not speak. He was hyperventilating, staring at the red folder in my hands as if it were a loaded weapon. I slid the thick folder across the polished wood table. It stopped precisely in front of their aggressive, high-priced family attorney. "I am officially denying the $20 million funding request," I announced, maintaining eye contact with my brother. "Your startup is not a tech company, Colin. It is a fabricated shell company, built entirely on ghost users' forged revenue streams and embezzled marital assets. Your business is a criminal enterprise and you are officially out of money." William lunged forward to grab the folder, but the attorney snatched it first. The lawyer opened the cover and began scanning the top page. I watched the attorney's eyes widen. I watched his breathing stop. He was looking at a meticulously documented trail of wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion. He was looking at undeniable evidence of federal crimes that carried decades of mandatory prison time. The lawyer closed the folder. He did not say a single word to William. He did not look at Brenda. He simply clicked his briefcase shut, turned on his heel, and walked straight out of the glass room, completely abandoning them to the corporate slaughter. I later learned exactly what transpired after my family was escorted out of the Vanguard Equity lobby by building security. Colin did not go to his startup headquarters to manage the crisis. He took a black car straight back to the historic Brooklyn brownstone he shared with Jada. He rushed through the front door, dragged a massive designer suitcase from the hall closet, and started frantically throwing clothes into it. Jada was working from home that morning, reviewing contracts in the study. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom watching her husband tear through his drawers like a cornered animal. She demanded to know what was going on. Colin lied effortlessly. He told her I had completely lost my mind. He claimed I fabricated financial documents out of pure bitter jealousy to sabotage his funding and ruin his reputation. He said we needed to leave the city for a few weeks until his lawyers sorted out my supposed defamation campaign. But Jada was a senior corporate litigator. She spent her days dismantling complex corporate mergers and interrogating fraudulent executives under oath. She knew how to spot a liar, and right now she was married to a terrible one. While Colin rushed to the master bathroom to gather his toiletries, Jada did what any competent attorney would do. She opened her laptop. She bypassed the joint checking account Colin always showed her and dug directly into the primary asset portals using her own credentials. She checked the deed on their brownstone, and then she checked her personal high-yield savings account, where she deposited her annual firm bonuses. The numbers on the screen made her blood run cold. Her entire savings account money she had earned through years of 80-hour work weeks and grueling court battles was completely drained. The balance was zero. There was a trail of unauthorized wire transfers leading to an offshore account holding Colin's startup name. Worse, Colin had forged her signature to take out a massive second mortgage on their home. He had leveraged everything they owned to cover his tracks, and the money was already gone. Colin walked back into the bedroom, zipping his leather toiletry bag, urging her to hurry up and pack so they could beat the afternoon traffic to the Hamptons. Jada turned the laptop around so the screen faced him. She did not yell. She did not throw anything. Her voice was terrifyingly calm when she asked him where her money went. Colin froze. The color drained from his face for the second time that day. He tried to stammer out an excuse about a temporary liquidity issue, promising the venture capital funds would replace it tenfold by the end of the month. He begged her to trust his vision. But before he could finish his pathetic lie, the front door of the brownstone opened downstairs. Brenda and William had let themselves in with their spare key, rushing upstairs to secure their golden boy. Brenda marched into the bedroom, taking one look at the laptop screen and Jada's furious expression. Instead of apologizing for her son's blatant theft, my mother immediately went on the offensive. Brenda stepped between Jada and Colin, lifting her chin with that signature arrogance she used to belittle anyone she deemed beneath her. She told Jada to stop being dramatic over a simple cash flow problem. She actually had the audacity to look Jada in the eye and tell her that it was her duty as a wife to support her husband unconditionally. Brenda demanded that Jada use her legal connections at her prestigious firm to draft a defense strategy and fix Colin's mess before the authorities got involved. Jada looked at my mother, then at my father, who was silently nodding in agreement, and finally at her husband, who was hiding behind his parents. The absolute entitlement of these people disgusted her. "I am a black woman who earned a Harvard law degree through pure grit and intelligence," Jada said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I worked my entire life to build my career, and I will be damned if I throw my license and my freedom away to cover up federal wire fraud for a man who steals from his own wife." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck, sputtering about family loyalty and disrespect. William warned Jada not to make an enemy out of their family. Jada ignored them completely. She did not pack a suitcase. She simply picked up her briefcase, grabbed her car keys, and walked right past them. She walked out the front door, leaving Colin to deal with the financial crater he had created. I was sitting in my office at Vanguard, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, waiting for the inevitable fallout. I knew William and Brenda would not go down without a fight, but I also knew their foundation was crumbling rapidly. My phone buzzed on the glass desk. I did not recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. Vanessa, the voice on the other end, said. It was Jada. I could hear the roar of city traffic in the background. Her breathing was heavy, fueled by a mixture of betrayal and raw adrenaline. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask for an apology for the chaos at dinner the night before. She was entirely focused on the truth. I need to see those ledgers, Jada said, her tone absolutely resolute. We need to talk, now. 20 minutes after. Jada called my phone. I was sitting in a secluded leather booth at an exclusive members-only lounge in Midtown Manhattan. The lighting was intentionally dim, and the ambient noise was low enough to ensure absolute privacy. I had a heavy manila folder resting on the polished wood table in front of me. Jada walked in a few moments later. She looked nothing like the devastated, weeping wife my mother Brenda had expected her to be. Jada wore a sharp charcoal blazer, her posture rigid, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. She slid into the booth opposite me, placed her designer tote on the leather seat, and opened her laptop without even saying hello. Show me, Jada demanded, her voice entirely strictly business. I opened the folder and pushed a stack of printed highlighted ledgers across the table. I watched her eyes dart across the pages. As a top-tier corporate litigator, Jada read financial documents the way a surgeon read an X-ray. It took her less than 5 minutes to find the infection. She traced a manicured fingernail down a column of offshore wire transfers. The color drained from her face, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Colin did not just steal my personal savings to keep his startup afloat, Jada said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He was never funding a tech company at all. I nodded, leaning back against the leather seat. You see it now. The startup was a ghost town. Jada flipped to the next page, her brilliant legal mind connecting the dots with terrifying speed. The venture capital. He secured the loans he took out under my name, the second mortgage on our brownstone. He routed all of it through a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But the money did not stay there. She looked up at me, the realization hitting her like a freight train. The money funneled straight back into William's real estate development firm in New York. William orchestrated the entire thing. Colin is just his money launderer. Exactly, I replied. My father needed a clean way to inject untraceable cash into his failing commercial properties without alerting the Internal Revenue Service. He used Colin as the perfect clueless frontman. Colin got to play the role of a brilliant tech visionary for his ego, while William pulled the strings and siphoned the cash to save his own sinking empire. Jada closed her eyes for a brief second, processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Her own husband had actively conspired with his father to financially ruin her. She opened her eyes, fixing her sharp gaze on me. But why were you looking into this? You are a senior forensic auditor at a major Wall Street firm. Colin's fake startup is small change compared to your usual corporate portfolios. Why were you digging into his specific ledgers before he even applied for funding at Vanguard Equity? I took a slow sip of my black coffee. Because I have been tracking William's money for 5 years. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. 5 years ago, I applied for a lease on my first decent apartment in the city. I was rejected immediately. My credit score was completely destroyed. I pulled my credit report and found nearly $500,000 in defaulted business loans. William had stolen my social security number and forged my signature to open the initial credit lines to fund Colin's very first business venture. Jada stared at me in absolute horror. He committed identity theft against his own daughter. I nodded. I spent years fighting creditors, fighting collection agencies, eating ramen and working myself to the bone just to repair my credit and clear my name. Meanwhile, Brenda and William were buying luxury vehicles and taking Colin on European vacations, using the very money they stole in my name. I realized then that my family would never stop viewing me as a resource to be exploited. So I changed my major. I became a forensic accountant. I learned how to track every single digital footprint they ever made. I knew they would try to steal from me again, and I wanted to be ready to cut off their hands the second they reached into my pockets. Jada listened to my story in silence. The rigid tension in her shoulders shifted into a posture of absolute solidarity. We were no longer just sisters-in-law dealing with a messy family dispute. We were two highly intelligent, fiercely independent women who had been financially violated by the exact same men. Jada reached into her designer tote bag. She pulled out a crumpled, heavy stock legal document. When I was packing to leave the brownstone, I broke into Colin's personal wall safe, Jada said, placing the document on the table between us. I was looking for the deeds to our house, but I found this buried under a stack of old passports. I thought it was just a standard family trust agreement, but after what you just told me about William stealing your identity, you need to read the last page. I took the document. It was dated 15 years ago, shortly after my paternal grandfather passed away. I flipped to the final page, scanning the dense legal jargon until my eyes landed on the collateral agreement section. My breath hitched in my throat. "This is impossible," I said, my voice trembling for the first time all day. Jada leaned forward, her expression completely devoid of mercy. "It gets worse, Vanessa. Look at the signature at the bottom. William did not just use your identity to open credit cards. He used collateral. Your grandfather did not leave his estate to Colin like your parents always claimed. He left a hidden trust fund solely to you. William forged your signature to leverage your entire inheritance to build his real estate empire." I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a near-perfect replica of my handwriting from when I was 18 years old. The realization of what this meant crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. $4 million. That was the exact amount my grandfather had left behind when he died. For 15 years, William and Brenda had looked me in the eye and told me my grandfather had chosen to leave his entire legacy to Colin. They told me I received nothing because I lacked the proper business mindset to manage wealth. They lied. My entire life of financial struggle had been a meticulously manufactured illusion. I thought about the nights I sat crying on the floor of my cramped Brooklyn apartment, choosing between paying the heating bill or buying groceries. I thought about the crushing weight of the student loans that kept me awake at night, the collection agencies that hounded me because of the credit cards William had fraudulently opened in my name. All of that suffering happened while my parents were sitting on a $4 million trust fund that legally belonged to me. They forged my signature, locked my inheritance inside an offshore account, and used it as collateral to fund William's commercial real estate empire. I did not cry. I did not scream. The betrayal was so profound, so entirely evil, that it bypassed my emotions completely and triggered pure calculated survival instinct. "This document is a copy," I said, my voice eerily calm as I traced the edge of the paper. "It is a damn good piece of evidence, Jada, but it is still a secondary document. If we take this to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit right now, William will just claim Colin forged it to secure his own loans. William will throw his own son under the bus to save himself. We need the original forgery documents and the offshore routing numbers to bring federal charges that will stick." Jada leaned back, crossing her arms. "And where are the originals?" "They are in William's home office at the family estate in Westchester," I replied. "He keeps a biometric safe bolted behind the mahogany bookshelves. He is paranoid. He never digitizes his most illegal transactions. He keeps the hard copies close to his chest. But I cannot go anywhere near that house. Brenda has probably already flagged my face to the neighborhood security patrol. If I show up, they will have me arrested for trespassing before I even reach the front porch." Jada was quiet for a moment. She looked at the forged signature on the table, then up at me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "You cannot go near that house," Jada said. "But the obedient, terrified daughter-in-law can." I looked at her, understanding exactly what she was proposing. "They still think you are playing by their rules," I said. "Brenda practically ordered you to fix Colin's legal mess." "Exactly," Jada replied, her eyes sharp and focused. "As far as Brenda and William know, I am just the loyal wife rushing to her powerful in-laws for guidance. I will tell them I need to see the full scope of Colin's financial leverage to build a defense strategy against your audit. They are arrogant, Vanessa. They think because I am a black woman who married into their wealthy circle, I am desperate to keep my proximity to their power. They underestimate me, just like they underestimate you." Within an hour, we had a plan. Because of my background in forensic auditing, I had access to specialized equipment used for undercover corporate investigations. I handed Jada a tiny high-definition recording device disguised as a standard designer brooch. She pinned it flawlessly to the lapel of her charcoal blazer. Jada drove her car straight to the gated Westchester estate. Just as we suspected, the security guards waved her right through. She was family. She was the fixer. Through the encrypted audio feed synced to my laptop, I listened as Jada walked through the heavy oak front doors. Brenda greeted her with an overly dramatic sigh of relief, immediately pulling her into the lavish parlor. "I told William you would come to your senses." Jada, Brenda said, her voice dripping with fake maternal affection. "Colin is just under a lot of stress. You know how these brilliant tech minds operate. We just need you to use your connections at the law firm to draft a non-disclosure agreement and silence Vanessa before she ruins her brother's career." Jada played her part flawlessly. She kept her tone submissive, lacing her words with just enough manufactured panic to stroke their egos. "I want to help Colin," Brenda, Jada said, pacing the room to sound anxious. "But Vanessa is threatening a federal audit. If I am going to build a legal firewall to protect Colin and the family business, I need to know exactly what assets Vanessa is targeting." Colin mentioned a collateral agreement tied to a trust fund. "I need to see the original documents, William. If the FBI raids our home, I need to know what they are looking for." I heard the heavy footsteps of my father entering the room. He took the bait completely. He ushered Jada into his private home office, the heavy doors clicking shut behind them. "You are a smart girl," Jada Williams said, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial tone. "You understand that protecting the family assets protects your own lifestyle. Vanessa is throwing a tantrum because she found out about the offshore account, but she has no proof. I need to see the original trust transfer," William, Jada insisted, maintaining her professional, urgent facade. "If Vanessa claims her signature was forged, I need to verify the ink and the notary seal to prepare a counter-defense. Show me the file." I held my breath, staring at the audio waveform fluctuating on my laptop screen. There was the sound of a painting sliding along a wall, followed by the electronic beeping of a biometric keypad. William was opening the safe. He pulled out the heavy file and placed it on his desk. Jada flipped through the pages, her lapel camera, capturing every single unredacted offshore account number, every fraudulent wire transfer, and the original forged signature that had robbed me of my future. "This signature," Jada said, sounding perfectly hesitant. "It looks incredibly authentic. How did you ensure Vanessa would not notice the asset transfer?" Brenda let out a sharp, haughty laugh from across the room. "It was so easy to sign her name, Jada. You do not understand how naive Vanessa was back then. The ungrateful girl never paid attention to paperwork anyway. She was too busy crying over her little community college classes to understand high-level finance. We did her a favor. If we gave her that $4 million, she would have wasted it on something completely useless. We put that money to work." I closed my eyes, listening to the sheer sociopathic pride in my mother's voice. She was not just admitting to a federal crime, she was bragging about it. Jada did not miss a beat. "So you signed the transfer documents yourselves, Brenda, both of you?" "Of course we did." Brenda gloated completely, unaware that she was delivering a taped confession directly to the federal authorities. "William handled the notary and I handled the signature. It was a victimless crime, Jada. It built the life you and Colin currently enjoy. Now package this up into a defense strategy and go put that insolent girl back in her place." Jada carefully closed the file. The audio feed picked up the sound of her sliding her chair back and standing up. "Consider it done, Brenda," Jada said, her voice dropping, its submissive act entirely replaced by the lethal, commanding tone of a top-tier corporate litigator. "I have absolutely everything I need." Jada walked out of that sprawling Westchester estate with a recording that held the power to destroy my parents completely. We met later that evening in the secure parking garage beneath my building. She handed me the recording device with a grim smile. The audio was crystal clear. Brenda had practically gift-wrapped her own federal indictment boasting about forging my signature and stealing my $4 million inheritance. But William and Brenda did not build a ruthless real estate empire by being passive. They knew my audit denial at Vanguard Equity was a declaration of war. They knew I was hunting them. So they decided to strike first, not with lawyers, but with a vicious, coordinated smear campaign designed to destroy my credibility before I could hand my evidence over to the authorities. The attack started 48 hours later. I woke up to an onslaught of notifications on my phone. William had used his deep pockets to buy space in local tabloids and financial gossip columns. The articles did not mention the fraud. Instead, they featured anonymous quotes from concerned family members claiming that a certain lead forensic auditor was suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. They painted a picture of a bitter, estranged daughter fabricating financial crimes against her own family due to a severe mental health crisis. Within a day, I found my memberships to elite professional clubs suspended pending review. Colleagues called me asking if I needed a leave of absence. My parents were laying the groundwork to ensure that when I brought the offshore accounts to the feds, I would look like a delusional, vindictive woman making up stories. But Brenda was never one to settle for half measures. She wanted me completely neutralized. I was reviewing the offshore routing numbers on my laptop when the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was the head of security for my high-rise building. He sounded alarmed. He told me that my mother was in the lobby with 2 uniformed police officers and a private medical transport team. She was demanding they be allowed up to my penthouse for an emergency wellness check, claiming I had sent her threatening suicidal messages and was an immediate danger to myself. It was a classic, ruthless tactic. If Brenda could get me placed under an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold, my professional credibility as a forensic auditor would be instantly obliterated. Any evidence I presented against William would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. I closed my laptop, checked my reflection in the mirror, and smoothed down my tailored blazer. I did not panic. I simply picked up a thick manila envelope from my desk and took the private elevator down to the lobby. The scene on the ground floor was chaotic. Brenda was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. She was weeping into a designer tissue, clutching the arm of a police officer, begging them to save her sick, delusional daughter. Several wealthy residents of the building had stopped in the lobby watching the spectacle with wide eyes. When the elevator doors opened and I stepped out, Brenda let out a dramatic gasp and pointed at me. "There she is!" Brenda cried out, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Please, officers, look at her. She is not in her right mind. She has been making up terrible lies about our family. You have to take her to the hospital before she hurts someone." The 2 police officers stepped forward, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, "we received a report that you might be experiencing a mental health crisis. We just need to ask you a few questions." I walked forward with absolute steady confidence. I did not look like a woman having a breakdown. I looked like a Wall Street executive who owned the building. I stopped right in front of the officers and handed the first man the manila envelope. "Officers, I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice completely calm and professional. "But I can assure you this is a fraudulent report designed to harass me. Inside that envelope, you will find a certified comprehensive psychological evaluation dated at 8 o'clock this morning, signed by the Chief of Psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital. It confirms I am in perfect mental health." Brenda froze. Her fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. I did not stop there. I turned to the second officer and handed him another folded document. "You will also find a sworn affidavit from my legal team." I continued, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. "And that second document is an emergency court-ordered harassment injunction against Brenda. She is currently violating a judge's order by standing within 100 feet of my residence." The police officer looked at the certified evaluation, then at the injunction, and finally turned to glare at my mother. "Filing a false wellness check is a serious offense. Using emergency resources to harass a family member is a crime." Brenda took a step back, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. She looked around the lobby. The elite residents she had been trying to impress with her concerned mother act were now whispering and staring at her with profound disgust. Her public humiliation was absolute. "This is a mistake," Brenda stammered, her face turning a deep, blotchy red. "She is manipulating you. She is lying." "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises immediately," the lead officer said, his tone turning sharp and authoritative. "If you return to this address, or if you contact this woman again, you will be arrested for violating a protective order." Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the medical transport team was already packing up their equipment in disgust. The police officers took a step toward her, gesturing toward the revolving doors. She shot me a look of pure venomous hatred before turning on her heel and storming out of the lobby, her designer bag swinging wildly at her side. I watched her leave, feeling a profound sense of victory. They tried to break my mind, and I broke their facade instead. But while William and Brenda were busy failing to discredit me, my golden boy brother was spiraling out of control. Colin was completely cut off from Vanguard's funding. His startup was a dead shell, his accounts were drained, and William was too busy hiding his own assets to bail him out this time. Colin owed massive amounts of money to very dangerous people and his deadlines had expired. Desperate for cash, Colin did the unthinkable. He bypassed the banks and approached an underground syndicate of loan sharks operating out of a dark money firm in the city. He borrowed heavily to cover his immediate tracks, but he needed collateral to secure the illegal funds. Colin used the only asset he had left. He used the historic brownstone he shared with Jada, putting her residential address directly on the syndicate's radar. He had essentially painted a target on his own wife's back, dragging a fiercely intelligent, innocent woman right into the crosshairs of violent criminals. Jada had absolutely no idea that dangerous men were now watching her home, waiting to collect a debt she knew nothing about. William and Brenda did not retreat after their humiliating failure in my lobby. They doubled down. They operated on the delusion that enough money and status could fix any problem, so they hosted the annual Manhattan Heritage Charity Gala. To the public, it was an elite philanthropic event designed to raise money for urban development. In reality, it was a desperate, highly orchestrated fundraising trap. They needed a massive influx of untraceable private investment to replace the millions Colin had lost, and they needed it before the federal authorities started digging into their tax returns. Jada was already inside the grand ballroom when I arrived. She wore a stunning crimson evening gown, her natural hair styled in a flawless crown. She held a champagne flute, smiling politely beside Colin, playing the role of the devoted, supportive wife to absolute perfection. Colin looked like a man walking to his own execution, his eyes constantly darting toward the exit doors. He knew illegal loan sharks were currently circling his Brooklyn brownstone, but he had to play the confident tech visionary for William's potential investors tonight. Jada caught my eye from across the room. She gave me a single microscopic nod. The hunt was on. I did not sneak into the ballroom through a side door. I walked straight through the main entrance wearing a custom emerald silk gown that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. The dress was paid for by my own legitimate wealth, not stolen trust funds or fraudulent credit lines. I held my head high, projecting the exact kind of untouchable power my mother had spent her entire life trying to fake. It took less than 3 minutes for Brenda to spot me. Her face contorted with absolute rage. She waved frantically to a pair of broad-shouldered event security guards stationed near the ice sculptures. Brenda marched toward me, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor, the guards trailing right behind her. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, keeping her voice low so the wealthy donors nearby would not hear her panic. "You are not on the guest list. Officers, remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing and harassing my family." The guards stepped forward, their large hands reaching out to grab my arms. I did not flinch. I simply raised a single manicured finger, stopping them dead in their tracks. "Before you touch me, gentlemen, you might want to check your chain of command," I said, my voice carrying a lethal, unwavering calm. "You report to the floor manager. The floor manager reports to the primary vendor for tonight's event. And as of yesterday morning, my private holding company finalized the acquisition of Elite Dining Events, the firm staffing and catering this entire gala. I own the company that signed your contracts for tonight. I own this room. If you lay a hand on your employer, you will be looking for new jobs in the morning." The two security guards exchanged a quick, uncertain glance. One of them tapped his earpiece, listened to a frantic whisper from his supervisor for a moment, and then nodded respectfully at me. They took a wide step back and returned to their posts without saying another word. Brenda stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom. Her mouth opened and closed, but she could not form a single syllable. She looked at the opulent floral arrangements, the waitstaff carrying silver trays of appetizers, the guards standing strictly by the doors, suddenly realizing that she was standing inside a fortress I completely controlled. "Enjoy the caviar, Brenda," I said with a razor-sharp smile. "I made sure the kitchen plated it exactly the way you like it." I left my mother hyperventilating near the ice sculptures and glided across the room toward the massive champagne tower. William was standing there desperately pitching his commercial real estate fund to a man named Mr. Kensington. Kensington was a notoriously cautious billionaire investor, and he was the exact financial lifeline William needed to cover Colin's massive debt before the entire scheme collapsed. William was sweating through his expensive tuxedo collar, laughing a little too loudly at a joke Kensington had just made. I walked right up to them, plucking a crystal flute from the glowing tower. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said smoothly, inserting myself into their exclusive circle. William choked on his champagne. His eyes went wide with sheer terror, his knuckles turning white around his glass. "Vanessa, this is a private business discussion. You need to excuse yourself." I turned to the billionaire, flashing a bright, highly professional smile. "Mr. Kensington, it is a pleasure to finally meet you. I am William's daughter, Vanessa. I am a lead forensic auditor on Wall Street." Kensington smiled, looking genuinely impressed. "A forensic auditor. That is a brilliant field. Your father was just telling me about his aggressive expansion plans for his new commercial properties." "Oh, his expansion plans are certainly aggressive," I replied, taking a slow sip of my drink. "I always admire cautious investors like you, Mr. Kensington. You keep your domestic portfolios incredibly clean, which is so crucial right now, especially with the Securities and Exchange Commission quietly handing out federal subpoenas this week." Kensington frowned, his elite business instincts instantly flaring. "Subpoenas? For what exactly?" I looked directly at William, watching absolute horror paralyze his features. "The federal authorities are cracking down on real estate developers who use offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands to artificially inflate their domestic assets. It is a massive money laundering sweep. Anyone transferring funds to those specific offshore accounts right now is going to be caught in a very messy, very public federal indictment. But of course, Dad, you already knew that." I turned back to Kensington and smiled warmly. "Enjoy the gala, sir. It is a beautiful night for charity." I gracefully walked away, blending back into the elegant crowd. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see the aftermath. Kensington was not a fool. He looked at William's ashen, sweating face, and he connected the dots instantly. He set his untouched glass of champagne down on a passing waiter's silver tray. Kensington buttoned his suit jacket, shook his head in absolute disgust, and walked straight out of the ballroom without looking back. William stood completely alone by the champagne tower, utterly stranded. His last financial lifeline had just walked out the door, and the reality of his impending destruction was finally sinking in. The moment Mr. Kensington walked out of that ballroom, the invisible empire my parents had built completely evaporated. William stood by the glowing champagne tower with a glass of expensive vintage wine trembling in his hand. He watched his last financial lifeline disappear into the Manhattan night, taking his freedom with it. The charity gala continued around them, the string quartet playing a lively symphony, but for Brenda and William, the music had officially stopped. Panic set in with the ruthless efficiency of a spreading fire. They knew the federal authorities were circling. They knew Vanguard Equity had denied the bailout. And now they had absolutely zero capital to cover the millions of dollars missing from their fraudulent accounts. Within 2 hours, William and Brenda abandoned their own party and retreated to their heavily guarded estate in Westchester. The lavish facade they presented to the world was entirely stripped away the second the heavy oak doors closed behind them. William bypassed his usual aged scotch and poured himself straight vodka. Brenda paced the length of the Persian rug, her designer gown rustling, as she frantically muttered about her social standing in the country club. They realized they were standing on a sinking ship, and they needed someone to throw overboard so they could steal the only lifeboat. At 2 o'clock in the morning, they summoned Colin to the estate. Colin arrived looking like a hunted animal. He had been drinking heavily, his tuxedo jacket wrinkled and his tie missing. He was terrified to return to his Brooklyn brownstone because he knew the illegal loan sharks he had borrowed from were watching the property. He walked into William's home office expecting salvation. He expected his powerful father to hand him a cashier's check, a secret offshore account number, or a private jet ticket to safety. I expected his parents to save their golden boy just like they had done his entire life. Instead, William sat behind his massive mahogany desk and slid a single stapled legal document across the polished wood. Colin stared at it, his bloodshot eyes trying to focus on the dense legal jargon. There was no check, there were no plane tickets, it was a sworn affidavit of guilt. William folded his hands on the desk, his voice completely devoid of paternal affection. He spoke to Colin exactly the way he spoke to a failing business asset. He explained that the Securities and Exchange Commission was going to freeze their accounts by the end of the week. He said the only way to protect the family's core assets was to create a firewall. That document was a full confession. It stated that Colin acted entirely alone. It claimed Colin orchestrated the wire fraud independently, embezzled the marital assets without any outside guidance, and fabricated the tech startup strictly for his own personal gain. It completely absolved William and his real estate firm of any knowledge or involvement in the money laundering scheme. Colin looked at the paper, then up at his father in sheer disbelief. "You want me to take the fall? You want me to go to federal prison?" Brenda stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Colin's trembling shoulder. She employed the same toxic, manipulative warmth she had used to control him since childhood. "You have to be brave for us, darling," Brenda said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "White-collar prisons are basically country clubs. You will only serve a few years. William and I will make sure your commissary account is full, and when you get out we will have a trust fund waiting for you. You have your whole life ahead of you, Colin. Take the fall for the family. Do this for your mother." The delusion shattered instantly. For 35 years, Colin believed he was the brilliant, untouchable heir to the family dynasty. He believed his parents worshipped his potential. Looking at the cold, calculating stares of his mother and father, the horrifying truth finally dawned on him. They did not view him as a genius. They viewed him as a meat shield. They were perfectly willing to sacrifice his freedom, his marriage, and his entire future just to save their own lavish lifestyle. "I will not do it!" Colin shouted, backing away from the desk. "I am not taking the fall for your money laundering. You set up those Cayman Island accounts, Dad. You told me exactly how to route the funds. If the feds come for me, I am telling them everything." William's face turned to stone. He did not yell. He simply delivered the killing blow with terrifying precision. "Tell them whatever you want," Colin Williams said coldly. "But my name is not on a single document. I did not sign the pitch decks you submitted to Vanguard Equity. I did not forge your wife's signature on the second mortgage. I did not sign the loan agreements with the underground syndicate currently waiting outside your house to break your legs. Your signature is on every single piece of paper. You are the CEO on record. You have absolutely no money, no leverage, and no protection. Sign the confession or I will let the loan sharks handle you before the feds even get a chance." Colin backed out of the office, his chest heaving with panic. He realized he was completely trapped. He had no wife to protect him. He had no parents to bail him out. He turned and ran out of the mansion, sprinting down the driveway into the cold night. 2 hours later, the intercom buzzed in my penthouse. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final audit reports on my laptop. My private security detail stationed in the lobby informed me that a frantic man claiming to be my brother was begging to be let up. He was crying, demanding to speak to me, refusing to leave the premises. I took the private elevator down to the ground floor. The marble lobby was quiet, guarded by 2 armed men in dark suits. Colin was standing near the revolving doors. He looked completely broken. The golden boy was finally on his knees. When the elevator doors parted and I stepped out, Colin practically lunged forward, but the security guards instantly blocked his path. "Vanessa, please," Colin begged, tears streaming down his face. "You have to help me. They are going to let me take the fall for everything. Dad set me up. The loan sharks are going to kill me, and the feds are going to lock me away." I stood 10 feet away from him, my hands tucked neatly into the pockets of my silk trousers. I felt absolutely zero pity for the man who had gladly spent my stolen inheritance on luxury sports cars and European vacations. "I will give you everything," Colin sobbed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I will testify against Mom and Dad in federal court. I will give you the passwords to Dad's encrypted servers. I will tell the FBI exactly how he forged your signature 15 years ago. Just protect me, please, Vanessa. Give me a deal. I looked at him with cold, absolute authority. He was offering me the exact keys I needed to ensure William and Brenda spent the rest of their lives behind bars. He was handing me the ultimate victory on a silver platter. But I did not need his charity, and I certainly did not need his cooperation. I already had a much better plan. I do not make deals with criminals, Colin, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic sobbing like a blade. I turned around and pressed the button to call the elevator back down. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, but Jada might. I watched Colin stumble backward toward the revolving doors of my lobby. His chest heaved as he realized I was not going to be his savior. He turned and sprinted out into the freezing Manhattan night, clinging to the only lifeline he thought he had left. He thought his wife would save him. Jada told me exactly how the meeting went down. Colin did not go back to their Brooklyn brownstone. He knew the loan sharks were still circling the block. Instead, he called Jada in a blind panic and begged her to meet him at a secure location. Jada chose a private glass-walled conference room at her prestigious university alumni club in Midtown. It was neutral, highly secure, and visually intimidating. When Colin arrived, he looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck only to wash up on a deserted island. His expensive tuxedo was stained with sweat and rain. He paced the length of the room, running his trembling hands through his hair. Jada sat perfectly still at the head of the polished oak table. She wore a sharp white blazer, her posture immaculate, her hands resting flat on the wood. She watched her husband unravel with the detached clinical observation of a predator studying its prey. Colin threw himself into the chair across from her. He immediately launched into a frantic, desperate pitch. He told her that William and Brenda had set him up to take the fall for them. He cried, begging Jada to step in as his primary defense attorney. He leaned across the table, grabbing her hands, spinning a web of manipulation he had relied on his entire life. He told Jada they could beat the federal charges if she used her connections at her corporate law firm. He promised her that once they cleared his name, they would sell the brownstone, move to the West Coast, and start over. He played the victim perfectly, claiming his parents had ruined him, and that Jada was the only person in the world he could truly trust. Jada did not pull her hands away immediately. She let him finish his pathetic performance. Then she slowly withdrew her hands from his grasp. She reached into her designer leather tote bag resting on the floor beside her. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the table. Colin let out a massive sigh of relief. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, a grateful smile spreading across his face. He eagerly tore open the clasp of the envelope, fully expecting to pull out a brilliant, meticulously crafted legal defense strategy or a retainer agreement that would shield him from federal prosecution. He pulled out the stack of heavily stamped legal documents. His eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the first page. The smile completely vanished from his face. It was a petition for absolute divorce. Right behind it was a massive civil lawsuit. Jada was formally suing him for the embezzlement of their marital assets, the fraudulent second mortgage he had secretly taken out on their home, and the total depletion of her personal savings account. She had attached a freezing order to every domestic financial account carrying his name. Colin dropped the papers on the table as if they were on fire. He stared at Jada, his mouth opening and closing in sheer shock. "What is this?" Colin stammered, his voice cracking. "Jada, I need a criminal defense lawyer. I am facing federal prison. You cannot do this right now. We are a family." Jada leaned back in her chair. Her dark eyes were devoid of any mercy. "We are not a family, Colin." Jada said, her voice echoing coldly in the glass room. "We are a liability, and as a corporate litigator, I eliminate liabilities before they bankrupt my clients. You are officially bankrupt." Colin's shock rapidly morphed into indignation. The fragile crying victim act completely disappeared. The arrogant, entitled golden boy clawed his way back to the surface. He slammed his fist onto the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You are going to abandon me when I need you the most," Colin shouted, glaring at her. "My family gave you everything. We welcomed you into our circle. We gave you a lifestyle you never could have achieved on your own. You owe me your loyalty." Jada did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words hit him with the devastating precision of a sniper. You thought because I was a black woman who married into your prestigious family, I would be too grateful to ever leave, Jada said, holding his gaze with absolute authority. You thought I would just sit quietly and tolerate your mother's constant microaggressions because I wanted access to your supposed wealth. You thought I would be the loyal, obedient wife who would happily clean up your messes to protect your precious last name. Jada stood up, planting her hands on the oak table and leaning over him. Let me make something abundantly clear to you, Colin. I earned my Harvard Law degree through pure intellect and grueling sleepless nights. You bought your degree with stolen money. I built my career on winning impossible corporate battles. You built your business by stealing from your own sister and defrauding your own wife. I do not owe you a single ounce of loyalty. Sign the papers. Colin was shaking with absolute rage. His ego had been entirely dismantled by the very woman he thought he could manipulate. He shoved the divorce papers back across the table. I am not signing anything, Colin snarled, his true vicious nature fully exposed. If you leave me now, I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell the federal investigators that you were a co-conspirator in my startup. I will tell them you helped me structure the offshore accounts. You are my wife. Our assets are tied together. If I go down for wire fraud, I am taking your spotless legal career down with me. You will be disbarred before the trial even starts. Jada did not flinch at his threat. She simply looked down at him and smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. I figured you would say that, Jada said, her tone utterly triumphant. She picked up her briefcase and slung her tote bag over her shoulder. She looked at the man she had once promised to spend her life with, feeling nothing but profound satisfaction. That is why I already submitted your offshore account numbers to the Internal Revenue Service, Jada said smoothly. Colin froze, all the breath leaving his lungs. I filed as an official corporate whistleblower yesterday morning. Jada continued, walking toward the conference room door. I handed over every single fraudulent ledger you hid on those servers. I secured full federal immunity for myself in exchange for serving them your entire money laundering operation on a silver platter. The IRS is freezing your remaining hidden assets as we speak. Jada opened the glass door, pausing just long enough to deliver the final blow. You do not have a defense attorney, Colin. You have an indictment. I suggest you find a very cheap public defender. She walked out of the club without looking back, leaving Colin completely alone in the silent room, staring at the divorce papers that officially ended his entire life. William sat behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at his glowing computer screen in absolute horror. The bright red banners flashing across his banking portals were not technical glitches. They were federal freezes. Jada had delivered exactly what she promised. By submitting Colin's offshore ledgers to the Internal Revenue Service as a corporate whistleblower, she had triggered an immediate and devastating chain reaction. The federal authorities had moved with terrifying speed, locking down William's primary commercial real estate accounts, his personal domestic checking accounts, and the massive shared credit lines he used to maintain his wealthy facade. Brenda paced the floor of the home office, her panicked breathing loud and erratic in the silent room. She clutched a heavy diamond necklace she had hastily pulled from her vanity safe. Her hands shaking so badly, the jewels rattled against each other. The elite charity gala had been a total failure. Their golden boy son was facing an imminent federal indictment, and now the money was entirely gone. William slammed his fist onto the desk, shattering a heavy crystal glass resting near his keyboard. He realized the net was officially closing. If they stayed in New York for another 48 hours, they would be trading their tailored designer suits for federal prison uniforms. But William was a ruthless survivor. He had spent his entire life exploiting loopholes and crushing other people to get ahead, and he had one final desperate card to play. He turned to Brenda and ordered her to stop crying over her country club status and start packing cash and passports. They were leaving the country tonight. William pulled up a heavily encrypted secondary network on his computer. He still had access to the $4 million trust fund he had stolen from my grandfather 15 years ago, which had grown to over $5 million with interest. It was currently sitting in an intermediate holding account, waiting to be fully integrated into his real estate firm. Because the authorities were currently entirely focused on Colin's fraudulent tech shell companies, this specific legacy trust account had not been flagged yet. It was their only blind spot, and William intended to use it. He typed in a backdoor code he had purchased years ago for emergencies exactly like this one. He initiated a massive final wire transfer. He routed the entire $5 million toward a highly secure, untraceable private bank in a non-extradition Caribbean country. He watched the progress bar load on his screen, his heart pounding against his ribs. He then picked up his burner phone and called a private aviation broker, paying an exorbitant premium to secure a discreet charter jet out of a small regional airport in New Jersey for that very night. Brenda paused her frantic packing, looking at William with wide, fearful eyes. She asked about Colin, wondering if they should call him to meet them at the airstrip. William shook his head without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. He told her Colin was a sinking ship, and bringing him along would only alert the authorities to their flight path. They were going to leave their golden boy to take the fall, abandon their crumbling empire, and vanish into a tropical paradise with my stolen inheritance. Brenda simply nodded, her maternal instincts completely evaporating the second her own freedom was threatened. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the kitchen island in my Tribeca penthouse, drinking a cup of black coffee. The city outside my floor-to-ceiling windows was quiet, but my digital world was blazing with activity. My laptop screen was filled with cascading lines of code. As a forensic auditor, I never just relied on official subpoenas or federal agents to do my job. When Colin had tried to hack into my servers days ago, he had unwittingly triggered a defensive tracing protocol I had secretly embedded deep in the network. That protocol had attached a silent, highly sophisticated tracking ping directly to William's private home network router. Suddenly, a bright green alert flashed across my screen, accompanied by a sharp audio chime. A massive financial transaction had just been initiated from William's encrypted IP address. I set my coffee mug down and immediately began decrypting the outbound routing data. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tearing through the digital privacy walls William thought were impenetrable. I watched the raw numbers align on my screen. $5 million, the exact amount of my grandfather's stolen trust. William was making his final move, trying to siphon the money out of the United States before the IRS could lock it down. I traced the destination routing number and the international SWIFT codes. The money was heading to a notorious private bank in the Caribbean, an institution famously known for shielding fugitive assets from the American government. I checked the transaction status on the banking portal window I had forced open. The wire transfer was currently marked as pending international clearance. Because of the sheer size of the cash transfer and standard international banking regulations regarding fraud prevention, the funds would not officially clear and settle into the Caribbean account until exactly 8 o'clock the next morning. William and Brenda were making a run for it. They truly believed they had outsmarted the system. They thought they could simply pack their designer bags, step onto a private jet in the dead of night, and completely disappear with the wealth that rightfully belonged to me. They thought they had won. I picked up my phone and dialed a direct, highly secure line. It rang twice before the lead investigator at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit answered. We had been coordinating closely ever since Jada officially filed her whistleblower report and handed over the offshore ledgers. The investigator immediately asked if I had seen the massive movement on William's network. He told me his surveillance team already had eyes on the private jet waiting on the tarmac in New Jersey. He said his financial team was preparing to step in and hit the emergency kill switch on the international wire transfer, locking the $5 million down in cyberspace before it could leave the country. He said they were ready to move in and issue the arrest warrants right now. I looked at the green pending notification flashing on my laptop screen. I thought about the 15 years of intense financial struggle, the crushing debt, the lies, the manipulation, and the sheer sociopathic arrogance my parents had displayed at that dinner table. I did not want them to just get caught at the airport. I wanted them to feel the absolute devastating crush of false hope right before their entire world collapsed around them. I told the lead investigator to call off the kill switch. He paused, clearly confused, warning me that if the money left domestic jurisdiction, it would be incredibly difficult to recover. I told him I had the situation entirely under control. I explained that if they froze the accounts right now, William would panic, cancel the flight, and immediately start destroying physical evidence hidden inside the Westchester estate. We needed them to drop their guard completely. "They are making a run for it," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy, echoing in the quiet penthouse. "But do not freeze the transfer yet. Let the wire process through the initial verification stages. Let them board their plane. Let them think it went through." The invitation arrived the following morning. Brenda called my phone, leaving a voicemail so drenched in theatrical sobbing it could have won an award. She begged me to come to the Westchester estate for one final family dinner. She claimed she and William had spent the entire night in deep reflection. She said they realized the severe errors of their ways, that the money had poisoned their souls, and that they just wanted to look their daughter in the eye and apologize. It was a masterful, sickening performance. If I had not been actively monitoring the massive offshore wire transfer pending in their accounts, I might have actually believed her. I knew exactly what this dinner was. It was a strict containment strategy. William needed to ensure I was not sitting in an FBI field office handing over federal warrants while his $5 million escape fund was processing. He needed me sitting right across from him, distracted and emotionally manipulated, until the money officially cleared international jurisdictions. I accepted the invitation without hesitation. I wanted a front row seat to their final illusion. I arrived at the gated estate just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sprawling mansion felt entirely different tonight. It felt like a tomb. When I walked into the grand dining room, the suffocating tension in the air was palpable. William was standing by the mahogany credenza, aggressively decanting a bottle of vintage red wine. Brenda was seated at the long table, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a linen napkin. But the greatest performance of the evening did not belong to my parents. It belonged to Jada. She was sitting perfectly still beside Colin. She was playing the role of the conflicted but ultimately loyal wife who had paused the divorce proceedings to give her husband one last chance. Colin looked completely broken, his hands shaking as he gripped his water glass, desperately clinging to the false hope Jada was feeding him. Jada met my eyes across the table. Her expression was utterly blank. We were two predators sitting quietly in a room full of prey. William poured the wine and took his seat at the head of the table. He raised his glass, offering a stiff, hollow toast to family unity. Brenda immediately launched into her act. She reached across the polished wood, trying to take my hand, but I smoothly pulled it back to pick up my fork. She did not miss a beat. She forced real tears to well up in her eyes, letting them spill dramatically over her cheeks. "Vanessa, please," Brenda said, her voice quivering with manufactured heartbreak. "We have lost our way. This horrible corporate world, the greed, the stress, it made us forget what truly matters. You are my daughter. I carried you. I raised you. I cannot bear the thought of this family being torn apart over financial misunderstandings. We want to make it right. We want to be a real family again." I took a slow bite of my food, watching her perform. It was absolutely fascinating how easily she could manipulate human emotion. She was pleading for my forgiveness while her husband had a private charter jet waiting on a tarmac in New Jersey, ready to abandon the country with my stolen inheritance. "I understand, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "Money changes people. It makes them do things they can never undo." Colin let out a quiet, pathetic sob next to Jada. He genuinely believed this dinner was going to save him from federal prison. He thought his parents had called this gathering because they had finally found a legal solution to save him. Jada placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, patting it gently, silently, ensuring he stayed completely docile and unsuspecting. The dinner progressed in agonizingly slow motion. The expensive catered food sat mostly untouched on our porcelain plates. The conversation was stilted, filled with empty promises and fake remorse. I answered their questions with vague, non-committal responses, playing the part of the daughter, slowly lowering her defenses. But I was not looking at their faces. I was watching William. My father was supposed to be portraying a deeply regretful, humbled man, but his body language gave him away completely. He could not sit still. His leg bounced relentlessly under the table. Every 3 minutes, he subtly pulled back his tailored sleeve to check his heavy gold Rolex. He was counting down the seconds. The international wire transfer protocol was scheduled to finalize its clearing process at exactly 8 o'clock that evening. The massive antique grandfather clock in the hallway began to tick louder as the hour approached. The heavy silence in the dining room amplified every mechanical click of the gears. Brenda had run out of fake tears and was simply staring at her plate, her jaw tight. Jada remained perfectly still, her hand resting near her designer tote bag. I placed my silverware down on my plate, waiting for the final curtain to drop. The grandfather clock struck the hour. The deep resonating chimes echoed through the mansion. 1, 2, 3. William stopped breathing. He stared intensely at his suit pocket. 4, 5, 6. On the eighth and final chime, a sharp, distinct buzz vibrated from inside William's jacket. He pulled out his heavily encrypted burner phone. He placed it flat on the dining table and tapped the illuminated screen. I knew exactly what the notification said. Wire transfer successful. The entire atmosphere in the room shifted in a fraction of a second. The heavy, remorseful tension evaporated instantly. William let out a long, heavy exhale, the stress leaving his body entirely. He picked up his wine glass and took a deep, deeply satisfied drink. He set the glass down and stood up from the head of the table. He smoothly buttoned his suit jacket, his posture returning to its usual ruthless, arrogant stance. The mask of the apologetic father was completely discarded. He looked down at me, a cold, evil, and triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Well," Vanessa Williams said, his voice ringing with absolute victory, "it has been lovely. But your mother and I have a flight to catch." The heavy silence in the dining room shattered the moment William spoke those words. The atmosphere shifted so violently, it felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. The performance was officially over. The mask of the remorseful, heartbroken father dissolved entirely, replaced by the ruthless, calculating predator I had known my entire life. William tossed his linen napkin onto his plate with a gesture of absolute finality. He reached for the bottle of vintage red wine and poured himself a generous glass, no longer bothering to maintain eye contact or feign any sort of parental affection. He took a long, deeply satisfied drink, savoring the taste of what he believed was his ultimate victory. Across the table, Brenda underwent a transformation that was genuinely terrifying to witness. Less than a minute ago, she had been weeping softly, playing the role of a devastated mother, begging for family unity. Now she simply reached up and wiped her completely dry cheeks. Her posture straightened. The trembling in her voice vanished. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the dining room. "You really thought I was crying over you?" Brenda asked, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. She leaned back in her heavy dining chair, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as a pest she had finally managed to exterminate. "We had to keep you sitting in that chair until the banks closed their international windows." Brenda continued, a cruel smirk spreading across her face. "We knew you were digging around in the corporate files. We knew you were trying to play the hero auditor. But you were always too slow, Vanessa. You were always one step behind us." Colin sat rigidly beside Jada, his eyes darting wildly between our parents. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him in real time. He looked at William buttoning his tailored suit jacket, then at Brenda gathering her designer purse from the floor. "Wait!" Colin stammered, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic. "What flight are you talking about? Where are we going? The lawyer said we needed to stay in the city to fight the federal subpoenas." William did not even look at his son. He kept his eyes fixed on the remaining wine in his glass. "There is no we," Colin Williams said, his tone utterly devoid of emotion. "Your mother and I have a private charter waiting on a runway in New Jersey. We are leaving the country tonight. You are going to stay right here in New York. The federal agents are going to need someone to arrest when they realize the commercial real estate accounts are completely empty. You are the chief executive officer on paper. You will take the fall just like we planned." Colin let out a choked, guttural sound. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked at Brenda, his eyes pleading for a motherly intervention that was never going to come. "Mom, you cannot do this." Colin begged, tears welling in his eyes. "I am your son. I did everything you asked me to do. I signed those loan documents because you told me to. You cannot leave me here to go to federal prison." Brenda looked at her golden boy with absolute chilling indifference. Yao became a liability the second you let Vanguard Equity deny your funding, Brenda said coldly. You failed us, Colin. We are simply cutting our losses. You should be grateful we gave you such a lavish lifestyle for 35 years. Consider your prison sentence the final payment on your outstanding debt to this family. Colin collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, quietly sobbing as his entire world disintegrated. Jada sat right next to him, her posture immaculate. She did not offer him a comforting hand. She did not speak. She simply watched the family she had married into tear each other apart, with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a toxic chemical reaction. William walked around the edge of the table, moving to stand directly behind Brenda. He placed his hands on her shoulders, projecting the image of an untouchable billionaire power couple. He looked down at me, clearly expecting to see a broken, defeated woman. I did not give him the satisfaction. I sat perfectly still in my chair. You know, Vanessa, Brenda said, her voice laced with pure sociopathic pride. We really did you a favor when we took that money from your grandfather. He was a foolish old man who did not understand how the world works. He left $4 million to a girl who wanted to live in a cramped apartment and ride the subway. It was a complete waste of capital. Brenda laughed again, the sound sharp and grating. You were always so naive, Vanessa, Brenda mocked. You worked yourself to the bone. You cried over those student loans. You spent your weekends eating cheap takeout and stressing over your ruined credit score. And the entire time we were spending your inheritance on luxury vacations to the French Riviera. We bought cars, we bought country club memberships, and we built a real estate empire using your signature. And now, we are taking what is left of it to a private beach where the American government cannot ever touch us. We are untouchable. William nodded in agreement, checking his heavy gold watch one last time. It is time to go, oh, Brenda, William said smoothly. Let the girls stay and clean up the mess. They are so good at doing the heavy lifting for us. He reached out to pull Brenda's chair back. They were fully prepared to walk out the front door, get into a waiting black car, and disappear from my life forever with $5 million of my stolen money. They thought they had executed the perfect escape. They thought I was just a helpless spectator to their brilliant financial maneuvering. I did not get angry, I did not yell, I did not throw my plate or demand justice. I simply reached out and picked up my crystal wine glass. The deep red liquid swirled gently as I lifted it. I took a very slow, very deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch across the dining room. Across the table, Jada subtly shifted her wrist. She discreetly tapped the illuminated face of her smartwatch. A tiny glowing confirmation flashed on her screen. The timing was absolutely flawless. I lowered my wine glass and set it back onto the table with a soft, definitive clink. I looked up at my father. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that only comes when you are holding all the winning cards, and your opponent has just confidently shoved their entire life savings into the center of the table. Are you absolutely sure that money went to the Cayman's dad? I asked, my voice carrying a terrifying razor-sharp calm. You might want to check the routing number on that confirmation receipt. The smile on my face was not vindictive. It was the smile of a forensic auditor who had just perfectly balanced the most important ledger of her entire life. William's arrogant, triumphant grin faltered. His brow furrowed in annoyance, assuming I was just making a desperate last-minute attempt to rattle him before he walked out the door. He looked down at the encrypted burner phone resting on the polished wood table. The screen was still glowing with the transaction receipt. He picked it up, swiping his thumb across the glass to expand the transfer details. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the numbers. It was magnificent. The color drained from William's face so rapidly he looked like a corpse. His jaw went completely slack. The hand holding the phone began to shake with such violent tremors that the heavy device rattled loudly against his gold wedding band. The Caribbean Swift code he had meticulously memorized for his grand escape was nowhere on the screen. Instead, he was staring at a standard, highly regulated 9-digit routing sequence that belonged squarely within the United States banking system. Brenda noticed the shift instantly. She stopped adjusting her designer silk blouse. She leaned over, grabbing William's arm, demanding to know what was wrong. She frantically asked him if the bank was holding the funds for a currency conversion check. William could not speak. He was hyperventilating. His eyes were wide with a sheer, unadulterated terror that completely stripped away his powerful billionaire persona. I set my wine glass down and folded my hands neatly on the table. "You see, Dad," I started, speaking, my voice ringing clear and authoritative in the dead silent dining room. "When you sent Colin to break into my penthouse to destroy my servers, you made a fatal miscalculation. Colin is not a tech genius. He is a fraud who bought his degree with my stolen inheritance. When he tried to force his way into my local network, my security system did not just lock him out. It executed an active countermeasure." Colin's head snapped up. He looked at me with wide, horrified eyes, suddenly realizing he was the one who had just unknowingly triggered the destruction of his parents' escape plan. I kept my gaze locked directly on my father. He accidentally downloaded a highly aggressive Trojan horse virus I specifically designed for your family network. It bypassed your expensive firewalls and buried itself deep inside your secure banking portal. I knew you would try to run. I knew your greed would force you to try to wire that stolen $5 million the second the federal walls started closing in. So I did not block the transfer. I just changed the destination. William started frantically tapping his phone screen. He was jabbing at the glass, desperately trying to find a cancellation button, a recall protocol, anything to stop the money. But international wires that hit domestic federal holding accounts are entirely irreversible. "The virus altered the autofill routing numbers on your outbound domestic transfers," I explained, enjoying every single second of their dawning terror. "I reprogrammed the destination address. Your money did not go to a non-extradition Caribbean island. It did not go to a secure offshore vault where you could live out your days sipping cocktails on a private beach while I cleaned up your financial mess." Brenda finally understood what I was saying. Her face turned a blotchy, dangerous shade of purple. She slammed her hands flat on the dining table, screaming at me, demanding to know where her money went. "It went directly into a secure escrow account controlled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I announced. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. "I embedded a specific reference code in the transfer metadata tied directly to your commercial real estate firm." I continued, my voice unwavering. "The feds are processing it right now as formal restitution for the victims of your massive money laundering scheme. You did not just lose your escape fund, William. You just willingly wired the exact amount of my stolen inheritance straight to the federal government. You just funded your own prosecution." Jada sat perfectly still beside Colin, observing the spectacular collapse with the analytical satisfaction of a top-tier corporate litigator. She chimed in smoothly. "Voluntary restitution before an indictment is often viewed favorably by the courts, William. But considering you tried to wire it offshore first, the prosecution will just use this transaction to add a charge of attempted flight to avoid prosecution. It carries an additional 10 years. William collapsed backward into his heavy dining chair. He looked like a deflated balloon. The reality of his complete financial and legal ruin crushed him instantly. He dropped his phone onto the floor. He had absolutely nothing left. No money, no leverage, no escape route. The ruthless businessman was finally dead. Brenda, however, did not freeze. Her mind completely snapped. The realization that she was going to spend the rest of her life in a federal prison cell, rather than a luxury resort, broke her fragile status-obsessed reality into a million pieces. Brenda let out a raw, hysterical scream. It was a sound of pure feral rage. She lunged across the dining room table, her hands reaching out like claws aimed directly at my throat. She knocked over crystal wine glasses and expensive china plates, shattering them across the polished wood in her blind, violent desperation. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. I knew I was perfectly safe. Before Brenda could even cross the center of the table, Jada stepped in, moving with incredible speed and precision. Jada reached out and grabbed Brenda's wrist right out of the air. She twisted my mother's arm down with calculated force, locking her firmly in place over the spilled red wine. Jada looked down at Brenda with absolute unyielding dominance. "Assaulting a federal witness," Jada asked, her voice deadly and perfectly clear. "Add it to the charges, Brenda." Jada released her iron grip with a disdainful shove. Brenda stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels slipping on the spilled red wine and shattered crystals scattered across the hardwood floor. She caught herself on the edge of the mahogany table, her chest heaving, staring at Jada and me with a look of trapped feral desperation. The absolute reality of their situation finally crushed whatever remaining delusions they held. The $5 million was gone. The offshore escape was dead. The federal authorities were already in possession of the stolen trust funds. They were completely and utterly broke. It was Colin who broke the silence. The golden boy, the untouchable tech visionary, who had been coddled and worshipped his entire life, finally snapped. He looked at the burner phone sitting on the table, then up at William, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You promised me! You had a way out!" Colin screamed, his voice cracking violently. "You told me to sign that confession because you were going to take care of me. You were going to leave me here to rot in a federal cell while you took her money to a private island. You ruined my life." William snapped his head toward his son, his own panic morphing instantly into vicious rage. "I ruined your life," William bellowed, slamming his fist onto the table. "You ruined your own life the second you decided you were smart enough to run a company. I had to build an entire money laundering network just to cover up your pathetic incompetence. You could not even manage a fake business without driving it into the ground." Brenda shrieked, turning her fury on William. "Do not you dare blame my son for your failures, William. You are the one who told me this plan was foolproof. You told me the feds would never find the offshore accounts. You promised me we would never lose our status. I am going to lose my country club memberships. I am going to be the laughingstock of Westchester. Then you should have stopped spending $50,000 a month on clothes to impress women who secretly hate you." William roared back, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. "You bled my accounts dry just to pretend you were old money." I sat perfectly still in my chair, resting my hands neatly in my lap. I did not raise my voice. I did not intervene. I simply watched them tear each other apart. This was the prestigious elite family that had spent 33 years making me feel like an unwanted burden. This was the sophisticated dynasty that had looked down on my career, mocked my clothes, and stolen my identity to fund their delusions of grandeur. Now stripped of their stolen wealth, they were nothing but a group of greedy, miserable criminals turning on each other the second the ship began to sink. There was no family loyalty. There was no unconditional love. There was only self-preservation. I looked at Colin, who was currently throwing a heavy silver serving tray across the room in a blind tantrum. I remembered the nights I sat crying at my tiny kitchen table, staring at collection notices for credit cards he had maxed out under my name. I remembered eating instant noodles for weeks just so I could afford the subway fare to my forensic accounting classes while he partied in a luxury sports car. I looked at Brenda, who was sobbing hysterically and accusing William of ruining her pristine social reputation. I remembered my college graduation the day she showed up late, complained about the seating, and told me that a finance degree was a complete waste of time for a girl with no natural ambition. She had intentionally tried to break my spirit so I would never have the confidence to look into my own financial history. And I looked at William, the ruthless broker who was now hyperventilating by the credenza. I remembered the sheer arrogance in his eyes when he told me I was cut off from the family wealth because I lacked a proper business mindset. He had forged my signature to steal $4 million from my grandfather because he thought I was too stupid to ever figure it out. I did not feel an ounce of sadness. I did not feel pity. I felt cold, calculated, and absolute victory. I had spent 5 years tracking every single digital footprint they ever made, and tonight I was finally cashing out. Jada stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. She watched Colin scream at his parents with a look of profound disgust. She had walked away from him the moment he showed his true colors, and watching him unravel, now only confirmed that she had made the smartest legal move of her entire career. "You are all pathetic," I said, my voice cutting through their vicious shouting match like a blade. They all froze, turning to look at me as if they had forgotten I was even in the room. "You spent my entire life treating me like a stepping stone." I continued, standing up slowly from my chair. "You stole my credit, you stole my inheritance, and you tried to destroy my sanity just to protect your fake empire. You thought money made you untouchable. But money leaves a trail, and you handed your trail directly to the best forensic auditor in New York." William opened his mouth to shout another threat, but the words never came out. The ambient, warm lighting of the dining room suddenly shifted. The soft glow of the crystal chandelier was instantly overwhelmed by harsh, rhythmic flashes of light, piercing through the sheer silk curtains of the tall, arched windows. Bright, blinding beams of red and blue painted the walls of the mansion, strobing relentlessly across the faces of my terrified family. Then came the sound. The piercing, deafening wail of multiple police sirens cut through the quiet Westchester night, echoing off the manicured lawns and the high stone walls of the estate. The sirens did not pass by. They stopped directly in front of the house. Brenda let out a whimpering gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Colin backed away from the windows, bumping into a marble pillar, his eyes wide with absolute horror. William simply stared at the flashing red and blue lights, looking like a man who had just watched his own executioner step up to the block. The crunch of heavy tires stopping on the gravel driveway was followed by the slamming of car doors, multiple car doors. The sound of heavy tactical boots running across the front walkway and up the stone steps of the wraparound porch sent a physical vibration through the floorboards of the dining room. The shouting in the house had completely vanished. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the strobing lights outside and the frantic, shallow breathing of my parents and brother. A massive, earth-shattering knock rattled the heavy oak front doors of the mansion. It was not a polite request for entry. It was an absolute demand. FBI, open the door. The heavy oak doors did not just open. They were forced apart with a deafening crash that shook the very foundation of the Westchester mansion. More than a dozen federal agents flooded into the grand foyer. Their dark tactical gear stood in stark contrast to the glowing crystal chandeliers and imported silk rugs. The command to get down on the ground echoed through the house, overlapping with the frantic barking of police radios and the heavy stomp of boots rushing toward the dining room. William did not surrender. The man who had spent his entire life orchestrating grand corporate escapes and manipulating the legal system decided to make one final pathetic run for it. He spun around, knocking his heavy dining chair backward, and bolted toward the glass French doors leading to the rear terrace. He truly believed he could disappear into the dark, expansive gardens he had paid a fortune to landscape. But he did not even make it to the door handle. Two federal agents intercepted him with ruthless efficiency. They tackled my father hard onto the polished hardwood floor, driving his face directly into the spilled vintage wine and shattered crystal from Brenda's earlier tantrum. William gasped for air as his arms were wrenched forcefully behind his back. The cold, sharp snap of metal handcuffs clicking into place sounded like absolute poetry to my ears. Brenda did not try to run. She simply lost whatever fragile grip she had left on reality. As an agent approached her and began reciting her Miranda rights, she started flailing wildly, slapping at the agent's hands. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, demanding they unhand her immediately. She yelled that she was a prominent member of the local elite country club, that she knew the mayor personally, and that her husband would sue the entire federal government for trespassing. She desperately tried to leverage a social status that officially no longer existed. The agents were completely unfazed by her suburban outrage. They grabbed her wrists, pulling them firmly behind her back. Brenda screamed that they were wrinkling her designer silk blouse, thrashing her legs as they secured the handcuffs. It was a pathetic display from a woman who still believed her bank account made her immune to consequences, completely ignoring the fact that her bank account currently held a balance of 0. Colin was the only one who did not fight. He dropped to his knees the exact second the agents entered the room, sobbing uncontrollably with his hands laced tightly behind his head. He looked up at Jada one last time, begging her with his tear-filled eyes to do something to play the role of the fierce corporate lawyer and save him from this nightmare. Jada just looked down at him, her expression carved from solid ice, and took a deliberate step back to give the arresting officers plenty of room to work. The agents hauled my parents up from the floor and marched them out of the ruined dining room. Jada and I followed closely behind, stepping out onto the expansive front porch to watch the final act of their spectacular downfall. The scene outside was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The long circular driveway was packed with federal vehicles, their red and blue lights strobing relentlessly against the pristine white facade of the mansion. But the true punishment for Brenda was not the police cars or the armed federal agents. It was the audience. The commotion had woken the entire neighborhood. The sprawling lawns of the adjacent estates were lined with the wealthiest, most elite residents of Westchester. These were the exact people Brenda had spent decades trying to impress. These were the women she hosted lavish charity luncheons for the men William played golf with while finalizing his corrupt real estate deals. They were all standing outside in the cold night wearing their silk robes and cashmere coats, holding their smartphones up to record the entire spectacle. Brenda was dragged down the front steps, her expensive heels stumbling on the paving stones. She looked up and saw the audience. The profound, inescapable humiliation hit her with full force. She tried to turn her face away from the glaring headlights and the glowing screens of a dozen recording phones, but the agents kept her moving forward. She was paraded across her perfectly manicured front lawn, in handcuffs exposed to the world as nothing more than a common thief. The high society reputation she had stolen my inheritance to build was completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. I stood on the top step of the porch, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jada, and watched my family reap exactly what they had sown. I listened to the murmurs of the wealthy neighbors as they watched William being shoved into the back of a transport vehicle. The illusion of the perfect, untouchable dynasty was dead and buried. An agent guided Brenda toward the back of a waiting squad car, pressing his hand gently but firmly on the top of her head to help her into the back seat. Before she ducked inside, she stopped. She turned her head and locked eyes with me where I stood on the porch steps. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, her expression twisted into a mask of pure venomous betrayal. "I am your mother!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking as it echoed across the silent, watchful neighborhood. "I gave you life. How could you do this to your own family?" I walked slowly down the stone steps, stopping just a few feet away from the squad car. I looked at the woman who had criticized me, belittled me, and stolen my future to fund her own vanity. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt completely free. "You stopped being my mother the day you put a price tag on my life," I said, my voice cold, steady, and carrying enough volume for the recording neighbors to hear every single word. "You sold my future to buy your luxury, and now the bill is due. Enjoy federal prison, Brenda. I hear orange is not your color." I turned my back on her as the agent slammed the heavy door of the squad car shut, sealing her fate completely. The heavy metal door of the squad car slammed shut, sealing my mother away from the elite suburban world she worshipped. I turned my attention away from the cruiser and looked across the expansive, perfectly manicured lawn. The federal agents were busy coordinating their transport vehicles, but my eyes locked onto my brother. Colin was standing near the edge of the driveway, flanked by two armed agents. The golden boy of the family looked utterly pathetic. The custom-tailored tuxedo he wore to the charity gala just hours ago was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands were secured tightly behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobed across his face, illuminating the thick streams of tears pouring down his cheeks. I was shivering in the cold night air, his chest heaving with violent, panicked sobs. He looked around the chaotic scene, his eyes darting frantically past the agents, past the whispering neighbors, searching desperately for a lifeline. His gaze finally landed on the front porch. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Jada. Jada was standing perfectly still beside me on the stone steps. She looked absolutely immaculate. Not a single hair was out of place. Her sharp, tailored blazer cut a striking silhouette against the harsh emergency lights. She held her designer leather briefcase in one hand, watching her husband unravel with the cold, clinical detachment of a judge presiding over a guilty verdict. Jada Colin cried out, his voice cracking loudly over the static of the police radios. "Jada, please, you have to help me." He tried to take a step toward her, but the federal agents instantly grabbed his arms, holding him firmly in place. Colin struggled against their grip, his desperation overriding his dignity. "Please, baby," Colin begged, tears streaming down his face. "You know I never wanted this. My dad forced me into it. He manipulated me. You are a brilliant lawyer, Jada. You know how these federal prosecutors work. You can get me out of this. We can fight this together. I will change. I swear to God I will change. We can start over. Just please do not leave me here. Jada did not say a word. She slowly descended the stone steps of the mansion. Her designer heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a steady, terrifying sound that cut through the noise of the ongoing raid. The wealthy neighbors standing on their adjacent lawns fell completely silent, watching the high-powered corporate litigator approach her disgraced husband. Jada stopped exactly 3 feet away from Colin. She did not reach out to comfort him. She did not offer him a sympathetic look. She simply unlatched the polished silver clasp of her briefcase. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. Colin stared at the envelope, a sudden, desperate spark of hope flashing in his bloodshot eyes. He genuinely thought his wife had pulled together a last-minute legal strategy. He thought the brilliant, Harvard-educated woman he had spent years deceiving was actually going to use her elite corporate connections to shield him from federal prison. Jada did not hand the envelope to Colin. She turned slightly and looked at the federal agent standing next to his right shoulder. "Excuse me, Officer Jada," said her voice smooth, polite, and ringing with absolute authority. "Could I borrow your pen for just a moment?" The federal agent looked at Jada, then at the envelope in her hands. He nodded respectfully, pulled a black ballpoint pen from his tactical vest, and handed it to her. Jada turned back to Colin. She opened the manila envelope and pulled out the thick stack of heavily stamped legal documents. She held them up so the flashing police lights illuminated the bold black text printed across the very top page: Petition for Absolute Divorce. The spark of hope in Colin's eyes died instantly. His jaw dropped. He stared at the divorce papers as if she had just pulled a weapon on him. "Jada, no," Colin whispered, shaking his head frantically. "You cannot do this right now. Not tonight. I am going to jail. I need my wife." "I am not your wife, Colin," Jada said, her tone dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. "I am the woman you tried to bankrupt. I am the woman you tried to use as collateral for your illegal loans. And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and an extra decade in federal lockdown." Jada stepped forward and placed the thick stack of divorce papers flat onto the cold metal hood of the federal squad car parked right beside him. She placed the black ballpoint pen precisely on top of the signature line. "Sign them on the hood of the cop car," Colin, Jada commanded. Every word was sharp, deliberate, and completely devoid of mercy. Colin shook his head again, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to reject the reality of his situation. "I will not sign them. You cannot force me. I will fight you in court for half of everything we own." Jada smiled. It was a beautiful, terrifying expression of absolute triumph. "I figured you would try to hold on to whatever scraps of power you think you have left," Jada said smoothly. "But you see, Colin, when I submitted your offshore ledgers to the IRS, I kept one very specific piece of evidence out of their digital files. I kept the physical encrypted hard drive containing your offshore cryptocurrency wallets. The wallets you set up to hide the money you embezzled from my personal savings account." Colin froze. He stopped breathing completely. Jada leaned in close, ensuring only Colin could hear her next words. "If you do not pick up that pen and sign your name on that dotted line right now, I will walk over to the lead investigator standing in your father's foyer, and I will hand him that physical hard drive. They will add concealing digital assets and advanced tax evasion to your indictment. You will not see the outside of a prison cell until you are 70 years old." Colin looked at Jada, finally realizing that he had been completely outplayed by a woman vastly more intelligent than he could ever hope to be. He was utterly defeated. There was no manipulation left to use. There were no more lies to spin. He looked at the federal agent holding his arm. The agent simply stared back, waiting. Slowly, the agent released his grip just enough to allow Colin to move his cuffed hands forward. Colin leaned awkwardly over the hood of the squad car. His hands shook violently as he picked up the pen. Tears splashed onto the crisp white paper as he pressed the ink to the page. He sobbed loudly, a pathetic broken sound that echoed across the manicured lawn as he signed away his marriage, his remaining assets, and his last shred of dignity. He dropped the pen onto the metal hood. Jada reached out and retrieved the documents. She checked the signature with a quick professional glance. The papers were perfectly executed, crisp and clean. She slid them back into the manila envelope and tucked them safely inside her designer briefcase. She did not say goodbye. She did not offer him a single parting word of comfort. She simply turned her back on him forever and walked away. Jada climbed the stone steps of the mansion and came to stand right beside me on the expansive porch. We stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold night air, our postures tall and completely unbroken. We watched in silence as the federal agents loaded my father into one vehicle, my mother into another, and my brother into a third. The heavy doors slammed shut in unison. The engines roared to life. We watched the three squad cars pull out of the long circular driveway, their tires crunching loudly over the gravel. The red and blue lights swept across the high stone walls of the estate one last time, before the vehicles turned onto the main road and disappeared into the dark. The flashing lights faded. The sirens grew distant, eventually swallowed by the quiet of the wealthy, sleeping neighborhood. The sprawling mansion behind us was completely silent. The oppressive, suffocating weight that had haunted my entire life was finally lifted. I looked at Jada. She looked back at me. We did not need to say a word. The nightmare was officially over. The flashing red and blue lights of the squad cars faded into the dark Westchester night. But the illumination of my family's crimes was just beginning. The federal justice system moves with a methodical, grinding pace, but when it finally strikes, it strikes with absolute crushing force. For 8 months, Jada and I worked closely with federal prosecutors, meticulously dismantling the fraudulent empire my parents had spent decades building. We handed over every ledger, every forged document, and every hidden routing number. We left them with absolutely nowhere to hide. When the trial finally commenced in a sterile wood-paneled federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan, Jada and I sat side by side in the gallery. We wore impeccably tailored suits projecting a united, untouchable front. We were there to watch the grand finale of the illusion I had grown up in. If anyone ever believed that William and Brenda possessed a single ounce of genuine familial loyalty, the trial shattered that delusion completely. The moment the threat of severe prison time became a reality, the perfect high society family turned on each other with the viciousness of starving wolves. William took the stand first. The arrogant, powerful investment broker was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating man trying to save his own skin. Under oath, he completely threw his wife and his golden boy son under the bus. He claimed Brenda's out-of-control spending habits and obsessive need to maintain her country club status forced him into financial desperation. He testified that Colin was entirely responsible for the wire fraud, calling his own son a spectacular failure who lacked the basic intelligence to run a legitimate business. Brenda's testimony was even more pathetic. She took the stand wearing a cheap, off-the-rack blouse completely stripped of her designer armor. She attempted to play the role of a terrified, battered housewife. She forced out fake, dramatic sobs, claiming William was a financial tyrant who forced her to sign the forged trust documents under severe emotional duress. She looked right at Colin sitting at the defense table and testified that her son's reckless greed had dragged their pristine family name through the mud. Colin was the last to testify. He looked awful. The bespoke tuxedos were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting suit provided by his overworked public defender. He cried uncontrollably on the stand, pointing his finger at his parents. He claimed he was just a naive victim of their manipulation, a pawn they used to launder money. He begged the judge for mercy, stating he was completely corrupted by the toxic environment his mother and father had created. It was a masterclass in cowardice. Jada and I sat in the gallery watching them systematically destroy each other to shave a few years off their impending sentences. They had spent their entire lives projecting an image of elite, untouchable superiority. Now, stripped of their stolen wealth, they were exposed as nothing more than selfish, disloyal criminals who would gladly step on each other's throats just to keep their heads above water. The federal judge presiding over the case was a brilliant, no-nonsense woman who saw right through their theatrical performances. She had reviewed the offshore ledgers Jada provided. She had seen the digital footprint of the intercepted $5 million wire transfer. She had examined the expertly forged signature on my grandfather's trust documents. She did not possess a single ounce of sympathy for any of them. When the day of sentencing arrived, the courtroom was packed with journalists and former high society acquaintances eager to witness the final downfall. The judge looked down from the bench, her expression carved from stone. She admonished William and Brenda for their breathtaking greed, calling their decision to steal from their own daughter to fund a lavish lifestyle one of the most egregious abuses of parental trust she had ever seen. The gavel came down with a sharp, resounding crack. William and Brenda were sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. There would be no early parole. There would be no comfortable minimum security country club prison for them. They were going to spend the rest of their natural lives locked in a concrete cell. Colin was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for his role in the corporate embezzlement and financial fraud. As the guards moved in to place the handcuffs on him, he turned around and looked at the gallery. He looked directly at Jada, his eyes pleading for a final sliver of mercy. Jada simply stared back at him, completely unblinking, until the guards physically turned him around and marched him out of the courtroom. With the criminal sentences handed down, the judge moved to the civil resolution. She formally addressed the massive financial damage they had inflicted on my life. The $5 million that I had successfully trapped inside the FBI escrow account was officially cleared. The judge legally dissolved the fraudulent holding companies and fully restored my grandfather's stolen trust fund directly to my name. The money was finally legally mine. But the judge did not stop there. She recognized the 15 years of immense financial suffering, the ruined credit, and the extreme emotional distress I had endured while my parents lived in stolen luxury. To satisfy the remaining restitution and punitive damages, the judge ordered the immediate total liquidation of all remaining family assets. Every luxury vehicle, every piece of expensive jewelry, and every commercial property William had leveraged was seized by the federal government. And at the very top of that liquidation list was the sprawling multi-million-dollar Westchester estate, where I had been treated like a burden my entire life. 3 months after the sentencing, the Westchester mansion was put up for a public bank auction. I attended the auction in person. I walked into the bidding room wearing a sharp, tailored suit, armed with my fully restored multi-million-dollar trust fund. When the auctioneer opened the floor for the estate, several prominent real estate developers raised their paddles, hoping to score a lucrative property at a discount. I did not let them even entertain the idea. I raised my paddle and immediately doubled the asking price, completely blowing every other bidder out of the water in a single devastating move. The room went silent. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. I walked out of the building that afternoon holding the physical, legally binding deed to the massive estate. Jada was waiting for me by my car. She looked at the deed in my hand and smiled. She asked if I was ready to move into the suburbs and enjoy the high society lifestyle my mother had valued more than my life. I looked down at the deed, then up at the Manhattan skyline. I told Jada I had absolutely no intention of ever sleeping a single night in that house. I did not buy the Westchester estate to live in it. I bought the very house that was used to oppress me for a highly specific, much more satisfying purpose. The morning after the bank auction, I drove my car straight up the winding gravel driveway of the Westchester estate. Jada sat in the passenger seat beside me, her expression a mix of profound satisfaction and sharp anticipation. We parked our vehicle in the exact spot where the federal squad cars had idled just months prior. I unlocked the heavy oak front doors and we stepped inside the mansion. The house smelled like stale designer perfume and failed ambitions. Brenda had left behind almost all of her custom furniture when she was hauled off to the federal penitentiary. The government liquidators had already seized the obvious valuables, the imported sports cars, the fine art, and the jewelry, but the pretentious, suffocating essence of my parents still deeply infected the walls. I did not want to preserve a single inch of it. I immediately hired a massive commercial demolition and liquidation crew. Jada and I stood in the grand foyer and watched with immense gratification as the workers stripped the mansion completely bare. They tore down the gaudy crystal chandeliers that Brenda had shipped in from Europe. They ripped up the heavy silk carpets that had muffled the sounds of their endless toxic arguments. They dismantled William's massive mahogany desk, the very desk where he had forged my signature to steal my inheritance, and hauled it out to a commercial dumpster. We watched the physical manifestation of their stolen wealth get dismantled piece by piece. It was the most therapeutic cleansing I had ever experienced in my entire life. But we were not going to sell the property to another corrupt real estate developer. We were going to weaponize it. Sitting on metal folding chairs in the completely gutted dining room, Jada and I drafted the official charter for our new organization. We decided to combine my specialized expertise as a forensic accountant with her brilliant ruthless skills as a corporate litigator. We established a fully funded nonprofit foundation dedicated entirely to providing elite legal and financial assistance to victims of familial and domestic financial abuse. In modern society, financial control is the primary weapon abusers use to keep their victims trapped and silent. We knew about husbands who hid their marital assets in offshore cryptocurrency wallets to leave their wives destitute after a divorce. We knew about parents who stole their children's social security numbers to ruin their credit and force them into perpetual dependency. We knew exactly how these financial predators operated because we had survived the absolute worst of them. Our foundation would offer pro bono forensic auditing to track down the hidden money and aggressive legal representation to seize it back. The symbolism of our new headquarters was absolutely perfect. The very mansion that William and Brenda had built using my stolen inheritance was now a fortress designed to hunt down and destroy financial abusers, just like them. We brought in top-tier commercial contractors to completely remodel the interior. We ordered them to knock down the walls of William's dark, secretive home office and turn the space into a bright, open-concept legal clinic where Jada would lead a team of fierce attorneys. The grand ballroom where my parents used to host their fake high society charity galas was transformed into a state-of-the-art collaborative workspace for my dedicated team of accountants and fraud investigators. We replaced the oppressive dark wood paneling with modern glass and brushed steel. We brought bright, blinding light into a house that had been consumed by dark secrets for decades. 6 months later, the transformation was officially complete. The opening day of the foundation arrived on a crisp, clear morning in early spring. The sprawling driveway was packed with vehicles, but this time there were no federal agents or flashing emergency lights. We had invited local community leaders advocates for financial literacy, and the very first clients our foundation had already successfully helped. Several major news outlets sent reporters and camera crews to cover the launch, deeply intrigued by the poetic justice of our story. The press absolutely loved the narrative of a stolen family legacy being forcefully reclaimed and repurposed for the public good. Jada and I stood side by side on the front porch of the estate. It was the exact spot where we had watched my family get shoved into the back of police cruisers in handcuffs. A sleek wooden podium was set up at the top of the stone steps. Jada gave a brilliant, commanding opening address. She spoke flawlessly about the power of legal advocacy and the absolute necessity of financial independence for women marginalized by wealthy abusers. The crowd erupted into loud applause as she stepped back and handed the microphone to me. I looked out at the faces gathered on the front lawn. I did not see the judgmental elite country club neighbors who used to attend my mother's pretentious parties. I saw survivors. I saw women who had been beaten down by debt and deception, women who were finally ready to fight back. I gripped the edges of the podium, my voice steady and ringing with absolute conviction. I told the crowd about the illusion of power. I explained that abusers use money to create a facade of invincibility, hiding behind complex ledgers and expensive lawyers, hoping their victims will simply surrender to the intimidation. But an illusion is just a magic trick, I said, looking directly into the news cameras. And magic tricks fall apart the exact second you learn how to look behind the curtain. We are here to tear down the curtains. We are here to follow the money, expose the lies, and hand the power back to the people who actually earned it. This house used to be a monument to greed. Today it officially becomes a monument to justice. I stepped back from the podium as the crowd cheered loudly. I grabbed a pair of ceremonial oversized scissors alongside Jada. Together we cut the thick red ribbon draped across the newly installed glass front doors of the estate. The doors swung open, inviting the sunlight and the public inside. I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I had officially closed the door on my traumatic past. I had buried William, Brenda, and Colin under the crushing weight of their own financial crimes. But my story was not completely over yet. I had one final score to settle with myself, and I was going to do it from the absolute top of the world. The sun began its slow descent behind the Manhattan skyline, casting a brilliant canopy of gold and deep amber across the Hudson River. I stood on the sprawling wraparound balcony of my actual penthouse in Tribeca. The air was crisp and the city hummed hundreds of feet below me, a constant electric rhythm of ambition and power. I rested my hands on the thick glass railing, feeling the cool metal edge beneath my fingertips. There were no flashing police lights tonight. There were no frantic phone calls, no collection agency notices, and no looming threats of financial ruin. There was only absolute unshakable peace. I heard the soft, smooth glide of the heavy glass patio door opening behind me. Jada walked out onto the balcony carrying 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of exceptionally rare vintage red wine. She wore a stunning emerald green silk dress, looking every bit the high-powered legal partner she had recently become. She had officially secured her promotion at her prestigious corporate law firm just 2 weeks ago. Her firm recognized her ruthless brilliance during the federal whistleblower case and rewarded her with an equity stake and a coveted corner office. She handed me a glass and poured the rich dark wine. We did not toast to simply surviving. We did not shed a single tear for the family that was currently trading their tailored suits and country club memberships for federal prison uniforms. We stood shoulder to shoulder and toasted to absolute undeniable victory. We were 2 fiercely independent, highly successful women who had been pushed to the very edge of destruction, only to turn around and completely dismantle the system designed to crush us. Jada took a slow sip of her wine, looking out at the glittering skyscrapers. She mentioned how incredibly quiet her life had become without the constant suffocating weight of Colin and his lies. She had formally finalized the civil lawsuit against him last month. The courts had stripped away every last remaining asset he had tried to hide in offshore accounts. He was currently serving his 7-year sentence in a medium-security federal facility in Pennsylvania. I was completely cut off from the lavish lifestyle he felt so entitled to, stripped of his fake tech visionary persona, and forced to face the harsh reality of his own staggering incompetence. Jada did not feel an ounce of pity for the man who tried to bankrupt her. She simply felt free. I thought about William and Brenda. They were locked away in separate high-security federal penitentiaries. They were entirely stripped of their stolen wealth, their elite status, and their fake friends. The wealthy neighbors who had watched them get dragged across their manicured lawn in handcuffs had completely erased them from their social circles. Their country club memberships were permanently revoked. Their real estate empire was dissolved and fully liquidated by the government. My parents had spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable asset, a minor inconvenience they could exploit to build their fake dynasty. They thought they were the brilliant architects of a grand master plan. They never realized they were simply handing me the blueprints to their own prison cells. My forensic auditing career had skyrocketed in the aftermath of the federal trial. The senior partners at Vanguard Equity were so impressed by the meticulous, inescapable trap I had set for my own corrupt family that they promoted me to a senior managing director role. I now ran an entire division dedicated entirely to uncovering high-level corporate fraud and money laundering schemes. I had a team of 50 brilliant accountants working directly under me, and I owned my $5 million penthouse outright. My credit score was flawless. My bank accounts were overflowing. My grandfather's stolen legacy was finally safe protected and being used to empower other victims of financial abuse through the new foundation Jada and I had built together. The foundation was already a massive success. We had taken our first 20 cases entirely pro bono, helping women who had been financially trapped by abusive partners. We used my auditing skills to find their hidden money, and Jada's litigation skills to drag those abusers into court and freeze their assets. We were taking the pain of our past and transforming it into a highly effective weapon for justice. Every time we won a case, I thought about the empty, gutted Westchester estate that now served as our headquarters. We had turned a monument to greed into a fortress of empowerment. Jada smiled, clinking her crystal glass against mine one last time. She took a final sip of her wine before stepping back inside the warm apartment to answer a call from a high-profile client. I stayed on the balcony for a moment longer, enjoying the cool evening breeze. I watched the city lights begin to flicker on, painting the New York night sky with millions of glowing pinpricks of light. I looked out at the sprawling metropolis, thinking about the long, exhausting journey that had brought me to this exact spot. I thought about the scared, exhausted teenager working night shifts in a cramped diner to pay off fraudulent debt. Then I looked at the reflection of the powerful, untouchable woman standing in the glass doors of the penthouse. I had taken back my name, my fortune, and my future. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect. They thought I was a stepping stone, a background character in their perfect little play. They forgot one crucial rule. Never hand your financial records to a girl who knows how to count. The greatest lesson from this journey is that family is not determined by blood, but by genuine respect. For years, I allowed the title of parents to blind me to their relentless financial abuse. They believed they could use my life as collateral for their own greed, but their underestimation became my ultimate weapon. I learned that you must always protect your independence and never let anyone control your financial narrative. Your true worth is not defined by those who exploit you. What is the most important lesson you have learned from walking away from toxic relatives? Please comment below.